2004 through 2009 Lexus Rx330 Bank 2 cat replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the cat. This is a factory replacement cat and gaskets that we're going to be using. If they're available, I'll link them up in the description. If not, you'll need to check your local dealer. So we're going to get started underneath the vehicle, and we're going to get the car up on the hoist. If you're doing this at home, use floor jacks and jack stands and jack it up over there on the pinch welds. And we need to remove the underbelly pans here. So there's two of them, one in the front here. We're just going to follow around the perimeter, removing the 10mm bolts, and there's also going to be a few clips that we're going to remove. So the Bank 2 cat is the one closest to the radiator. Bank 1 would be the closest to the firewall. We're working on Bank 2 today. So we're going to remove these belly pans here by going around the perimeter, taking out the bolts and clips. And once you get the belly pans dropped down, we're going to start back here in the back. So the first thing we're going to do getting started is to spray the bolts down with penetrating oil. These are notorious for rusting up and seizing up and giving you a lot of problems. So to reduce problems, we're going to spray them down with some penetrating oil, especially the ones on the heat shields here. They're small and they most likely will break, but if they do break off, we don't need to worry about it. We're putting a new cat on it, and they come with new spots where you can put new bolts in and everything. So give them a good dose of penetrating oil. So we're going to get started by removing the 14mm nut here and here. I'm going to use my Milwaukee Tools impact gun. You can use hand tools to do this, but impact tools just make it life easier. I will also link up all the tools that I'm using in the video in the description. That way if you need to pick anything up like that, you can find those links there. So we're going to go ahead and remove the two nuts. If you look, the stud came out with one of them. That's okay, because we're going to remove the stud on the opposite side also. You're going to need an E8 female Torx socket to remove the stud here. There's a little spot on the end of the stud where you can put the socket, and you're going to take the studs out. So once you take the two nuts off, then you're going to go ahead and remove the two studs from the manifold. And as you can see there, I loosened it up by hand and then switched over to an impact. Now we're going to go on the opposite side of the frame here and remove the 14mm bolt. This is a support bracket holding the cat in. So we're going to remove this 14mm bolt right here. I'm using a cordless ratchet to do this. You can do this by hand also. Once you get that bolt removed, now we're going to remove the heat shields here, and you're going to need a 10mm socket or a wrench, and we're going to take off the bottom bolt here, and then the bottom or the top nut right here in the center, and then the bottom portion of the heat shield will come off. I was lucky they cracked free, and I was able to spin these out. I also went ahead and just reached up and got to the next 10mm bolt on the top up there and went in and take it off. So once you get the bolts removed, you can go ahead and pull off the cover like this, or the heat shield off like this. Now we got the vehicle back down on the ground. We're going to work on getting the heat shield off and also get the oxygen sensor removed and disconnect it. The first thing we're going to need to do is get this air snorkel out of our way. To do that, we need to get access to the bolts here and here, and they're underneath this little cover. So I'm using a pocket screwdriver. I'm pushing the little clip in here, and I'm pulling the clip out like this. And then I'm going to work my way down, and I'm going to pop out the next clip right here. So I'm going to push it down, pop this clip out, and that should give us enough room where we can just push it off to the side like this and get to the two 10mm bolts here. I'm using my little impact tool here to remove these fasteners and make it quick. Once you get it unbolted, you can take the air snorkel and pull it out like this. I found that there was a vacuum switch here, the electrical connector was holding it up, so I went ahead and squeezed the tab and pulled the connector off, and now I was able to just flip it over and out of my way. I left all the rest of the hoses and everything attached to it, left it all hooked up. So now we can get access to the oxygen sensor or the air-fuel ratio sensor here and unplug it. So you're going to reach down here, and there's a little tab on the side of it that you're going to squeeze and pull the connector off. So you'll just follow the wire around and you'll see the connector. And once you get on the connector, you'll just press that tab. I'll try to get to a better view here, so I'll look down the side here. You can actually see it looking down between the cylinder head and where the air box is right here. If you look, I'm pushing the little tab, and I pulled it and unplugged it. I also pulled it from the connector, not from the wires when you do this. Now there's a little wire loom holder right here that we need to get off. It's attached to the dipstick tube here. So the way to get these wire looms off, the easiest way I found without damaging them and breaking them, is to take a wrench and put it underneath the wire loom holder like this. So you'll put it on the back side and you press up on it, and that'll squeeze the little tabs on the wire loom holder and pop it off. I'm using a 10mm wrench here. 11mm probably would have worked a little better. It would have fit around the tabs a little easier. So when you press the wrench on there like this, it squeezes the tabs on the left and the right side of it as you press it down over it, and then you're able to pull it off the whatever it's mounted to. So now we're going to finish taking off the heat shield. I'm going to spray this top bolt right here with some penetrating lube, and then I'm going to crack that free and take that out. So now you can go ahead and take the heat shield out. So what I did was I just grabbed it and slid it over towards the driver's side of the vehicle, and then nosed the front of it up like this and pulled it out. So now we're ready to take the air-fuel ratio sensor out. I just used a standard 22mm wrench. The connector was slid through the opening of the wrench, and then I slid it down the wire and got it onto the air-fuel ratio sensor. And I sprayed a little bit of penetrating oil on there, and then I went ahead and cracked it free. And luckily for me, it just spun out by hand really easy. Once you get the air-fuel ratio sensor removed, you can go ahead and spray the penetrating oil on the rest of the bolts on the manifold, and then we're going to work on getting those out. So I got this oxygen sensor or air fuel ratio sensor removed. Now I'm using about a small extension and a 14mm socket here. I'm using a deep one to get onto the corner bolt here. This is the hardest one. It's the lower one. So once I got the lower one cracked free, I just went ahead and just started moving around to all the other bolts or nuts holding the manifold on. So there's 3 on top and 3 on bottom. So I got the 2 on the bottom just the same way with a little extension and a 14mm socket like that. And then you just remove all the fasteners on top or loosen them up like this, and then you can switch over to a power tool if you like. It's a little tight in there to get to the power tools or cordless tools in there, but there's just enough room to do it. You may have to play with your socket and your extension sizes to find that perfect gap. So go ahead and remove all 6 of the fasteners, the 3 top, 3 bottom. And if you notice, I'm using a flashlight. There's no hidden bolts. You can see everything. So once I got the 6 nuts removed from the manifold, then I just switched over to a pry bar, and I used a pry bar to pry the manifold off the studs here. So just a light little pry to break it free and to get it to pop off the studs. And then what I did, once I got them popped off the studs, I started working the manifold out. And as I was working it out, it was snagging on the dipstick, so I went ahead for the transmission. So I went ahead and removed the dipstick for the transmission, and it has a little stud that was snagging on the wires on the fan shroud there. So kind of pushing the wires out of the way as I'm lifting it up. And then one of the things I noticed as I was coming out, I needed to angle the manifold in a little bit of an angle, and the bracket down here was making contact with the oil filter, so it wouldn't allow me to angle it just right to slip it out. So what I decided to do is go underneath, put a bucket underneath, and go ahead and take the oil filter off. So I went up here, unscrewed the oil filter, and took this filter completely out. We're going to replace it with a brand new filter. I wouldn't recommend reusing a filter, so we're just going to put a new filter on it, and I'll talk the customer into doing an oil change. This vehicle is also leaking oil and has some other issues, and I'm going to try to talk the customer into doing it. So once I got the oil filter out of the way, I was able to just kind of wiggle it and angle it to pull the manifold straight up and out. Now that the cat is out, we're going to go ahead and reach down here and pull the gasket off the studs here. So these kind of get stuck on there. You might have to use a little screwdriver or a little pry bar to help work it out. It gets snagged on the threads on the studs. It's made out of metal. So go ahead and slide this gasket off and work it out. It took me a couple of minutes to work this out. So the valve cover on this vehicle is leaking, and there's a little bit of oil on the surface here, so I went ahead and wiped it down. I would recommend you replace the valve cover gasket. The oil leaks onto the bolts and actually causes the bolts to loosen up on the manifolds and can cause exhaust leaks. So that's a potential problem area. So if you can, reseal your valve covers at this time. This customer, it was on a budget and he couldn't afford to do that. He just needs to get his car through emissions test. So that's the reason why we're doing this cat. Now on the lower manifold pipe down here, we're going to pick off the donut, the exhaust gasket, what they call a donut gasket. So we're going to use a pick tool and pick that off like this, and then we're going to replace it with the new one that I showed you in the beginning of the video. There's a little lip or ring where the gasket rides and holds it in place, so you don't have to worry about it falling off. Once that's done, you can go ahead and take the new gasket here for the manifold and slip that on. You want to make sure that this little tab right here is facing upwards like this when you go to put it on. So go ahead and slip it over the studs and push it in as far as you can go. Now we're ready to take our new cat and feed it down into position. So you just want to take your time. There's some wires that the little stud's going to snag on and stuff, and just take your time and slowly work it down into position. Once you got it down into position, slide it over the studs. Now you can go ahead and start all 6 of the nuts. I recommend starting all these by hands. We're not going to run them in just yet. We're just going to run them in until they're about 3/4 of the way run in, and that way they have a little bit of play so we can start all the bolts below. So we're going to start all these bolts now. To start the nuts on the lower side of the manifold, I just put them in a socket with a little piece of paper kind of holding it in place, and then I reached underneath the manifold and started it all by hand. Those bolts are started up top. I went back underneath and went ahead and screwed on a brand new oil filter. I lubed up the seal with a little bit of fresh oil, and we're just going to screw it on by hand and tighten it up until it's snug. Now with the filter installed, the cat is still loose. I didn't snug anything down yet, so now we're going to start the support bracket here. You're going to start the 14mm bolt here. I was having a little bit of trouble lining it up, so I went on the back side here, and I used a pry bar on the back of the manifold here and gave it a little pry to help line things up, and that popped the gasket and the seal and everything all into place, and now everything's starting to line up. And then after that, you can go ahead and start the studs here and screw those in. If you're having a little bit of trouble getting these to line up or start, you can loosen up the 2 12mm nuts right here that's holding the support bracket for the manifold on, and that helps line up, give you a little bit more play to line up these studs. Once you get the studs lined up, you can just run those in until they're snug. Then you can start the nuts and run those down so they're tight and torque them down to 41 foot-pounds. You'll kind of feel that gasket crush in there, so you may have to go over it a couple times. And if you loosened up the 12mm bolts here, go ahead and tighten those back up. Make sure your oil filter is on. And now we're going to go ahead and snug up these bolts down here on the bottom. They're a little easier to get to if you snug them up from below. And then we can go ahead and tighten up the 14mm support bracket right here. Now you can come back up top and make sure all the rest of the nuts are snugged up, and we're going to torque them down. We're going to start in the middle here, and we're going to torque it down to 46 foot-pounds. And when we torque these down, we're going to do in a crisscross pattern, kind of like you would do like a star pattern, like you would do a lug nuts on a wheel. So you want the load to spread out evenly. So you torque the bottom one down, and then you're going to move up to the top one once you get it torqued down. So you'll move up and you'll torque the next one down here, and then you'll move over and you'll torque the bottom down here, and then you move back up to the top over here, and then back over here, and just kind of in a crisscross pattern to all 6 of these fasteners are all torqued down to 46 foot-pounds. Now you can reinstall your air-fuel ratio sensor. I recommend replacing it. This customer is on a budget and couldn't afford to add it to the bill, so we were reusing the air-fuel ratio sensor, but go ahead and run this in and tighten it up. The torque spec is 32 foot-pounds if you want to put a socket and a torque wrench on there. Since this is being reused, I just snugged it up with my wrench. Now you can go ahead and reroute the wire back through the underneath the hose there and plug it into the wire loom, and then plug it into the electrical connector. Now we can take this air snorkel and go ahead and put that back into position. So you'll hook it onto the bottom of the air snorkel here, and then we're going to plug the vacuum switch back in. Make sure that's plugged in, and you can go ahead and start the 2 10mm fasteners. And if any vacuum lines, mine popped off here, so if any vacuum lines or anything popped off, go ahead and make sure those are re-secure. Start the 2 10mm fasteners and tighten those down. You can also put the top cover here and put the clips back in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the vehicle up and let it run for a minute and just listen to make sure that there's no exhaust leaks anywhere in the system. If there is, then we can address those now before we put the heat shields back on. You also want to do this quick. You don't want the car running for a long time, heating up the cat, because we still have to put on the heat shields and stuff. So you want to just do what you need to do to check to make sure it's good, and then shut the vehicle off. So mine was good to go. I don't have any leaks, and just for running, after about 10 seconds, the manifold started smoking already because they coat the cats with oil when they're sitting on the shelf so they don't rust. So I just sprayed it off as much as I could with some brake clean to wash off as much of that oil that's on there. So that way, when you start it up for the final time, it doesn't burn off all that oil for a long time. So now we can go ahead and take the top cover here, or the heat shield, and go ahead and feed that down into position. Once you get the top portion of the heat shield into position, you can go ahead and start the 2 bolts. So there's a stud below. You don't want to start that one there. You just want to make sure it's lined up with that. And once it's on there, then you can start the bolt here. And then there's a bolt on the side here. You can go ahead and start those and tighten those down, both of these. Now back underneath, we can go ahead and put the lower heat shield on. You want to make sure this little cone portion is pointing upwards, and then you're going to slide it into position. And then once you got it in there, you can go ahead and start the bolt and the nut in the middle and tighten those down. After that, we can take the lower belly pans and put those back up to position and tighten all those fasteners back down. So I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.